Welcome to the Research Culture Uncovered podcast, where in every episode we explore what is research culture and what should it be. You'll hear thoughts and opinions from a range of contributors to help you change research culture into what you want it to be.
Welcome to the Research Culture Uncovered podcast. I'm your host, Heledd Jarosz-Griffiths, and today's conversation is part of our LGBT History Month, which takes place every February in the UK. It was originally founded by Schools Out UK and has been running for 22 years this year. And just to say at the start, if anything we mention today sparks your interest, we'll share links and resources in the show notes, including some of the work that's happening here at Leeds, particularly through February with all the events that we've got planned. Now, each year, LGBT History Month has a theme, and this year's focus is science and innovation. Now, for me, that feels like a really important opportunity, not just to reflect on progress or visibility, but on how research cultures are actually experienced by people over time, and how identity, curiosity, and belonging play out in everyday professional life. Now, I'm really pleased to be joined today by two guests. We have Morgan Buswell, who has worked across internal and external communications at the University of Leeds, and has, for the last 2 years, been co-chair of the university's LGBT staff network. We also have Robin Hayward, a Communications and Engagement Officer within the Leeds Ecosystem Atmosphere and Forest Centre. Robin has also been closely involved in developing the university's inclusive fieldwork hub and the Pride Guidelines, which focus on improving safety, equity and inclusion for LGBTQ+ field workers. And they were recently commissioned to design the official badge for LGBT History Month 2026. So I'm really excited to hear a little bit more about that, and I'm sure our listeners are too. Now, before we dive in, can I invite you both to say a quick hello to our listeners?
Hello.
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
Fantastic. So together we're going to explore what LGBT History Month means in a research context, how science and innovation spaces are experienced by LGBT colleagues, and what helps create cultures where people genuinely feel able to belong and to thrive. So, to start us off, Morgan, what does LGBT History Month mean to you personally, and why does it still matter in a university research context, particularly this year with a focus on science and innovation?
I think for me personally, it's an interesting one because it's kind of like a balancing act with History Month about the difference between celebration while still acknowledging the sort of hard-won gains. So especially in the university context, if you sort of think about the history of LGBT people as we are, at the moment, a lot of that has been sort of hard fought for. So acknowledgement is kind of important, but at the same time, you really want to be able to celebrate the wins that we have. So it's a balancing act, especially for me at the network when I'm trying to sort of suss out events and things that are, going to be meaningful for the community, because we want to be able to have that sort of celebration aspect of it, but also to be able to provide insight, especially for colleagues who might want to educate students about it, the resources that we have available to us to be able to provide that insight that sort of sits alongside a lot of the lived experience that we have. And we have a wealth of lived experience at the university, and it can be, interesting to try and figure out how the best way to celebrate this month is. I mean, for me, it's mostly about the celebration. I think we do need to really celebrate how far we've come, and the shoulders that we are still standing on in order to have got as far as we have.
I think that's absolutely brilliant. That's such a great reflection. I think you've brought out some of the voice of the community there. And that's something that Morgan did before the podcast today, was to ask that wider LGBT community for their perspectives ahead of this conversation. And I think a theme, just as you've mentioned there, that really came through strongly was that chance to recognise that breadth and depth of experience across the campus, and that opportunity really to, make priorities and realities more visible. And to create that space as well, it's that opportunity for everybody to kind of come together and, like you say, to celebrate us as a community.
Yeah, Yeah, for sure. And in the institutional context, it's interesting because I don't think of history as being this sort of static thing. I think we can fall into this idea of history as being something that's relegated to the past rather than something that's being continuously made by, the actions of everyone going forward. And we've got a lot of really great work. I could wax lyrical about all of the work that's being done in terms of sort of progressive LGBT plus inclusive research that's happening at the university at the moment. Obviously, I don't want to speak on Robin's project on their behalf, but for instance, things like Paul Johnson's work. He's led a campaign with sort of crossbench in the House of Lords to get veterans who were impacted by the ban pre-2001 to make sure that they're getting financial recompense from the government, and that's been a very successful thing that's happened through the university. What else have we got? We've got obviously the laws of drag stuff that's happening in law to sort of explore the intersection between law and drag artists. This is happening across every faculty. Those are just the first ones that popped into my head because I used to do press and media for the Faculty of Social Sciences. But I know for a fact that there is huge amounts of this inclusive work happening all across the institution.
Yeah, no, I think it's really great to kind of highlight some of those key things. And actually, there is a podcast recording titled Drag Law and the Value of Collaborative Knowledge Sharing. In that episode, Emily Goodall spoke with James Greenwood-Reeves about the Laws of Drag Network and how working collaboratively with drag artists is challenging traditional academic norms and reimagining what research culture can look like. So if that's of interest to our listeners, I'd really encourage you to check out that episode, and we'll link it in the show notes as well. Robin, can I invite you in to share some of your perspectives?
Yeah, I think really just absolutely agree with Morgan, but we have this huge wealth of experience here and so many projects going on to help support and educate. But I think there is kind of this distinction where, especially this year and last year, I think there's less of an emphasis that I personally put on celebration, because although we have come a long way as a community and as a society, there is a lot of regression happening at the moment. And I think celebration sometimes provides things as kind of a done thing, like as if we've achieved a lot and hooray, we've achieved it. And I think there needs to be kind of these ongoing conversations about what we can do next. And obviously the university has this lived experience, I think was a phrase used, but also kind of this professional experience. And I think that's something that can go really nicely with the theme of this year's month. The idea that science and innovation is this very well-respected portion of academia to talk about not just the LGBTQ people living within that theme, but also the LGBTQ plus people who study it and where LGBTQ plus adjacent things are part of what they study. So I think there's this real kind of value to talking about that. And one of the things that this month in particular does really well isn't just a visibility month. It is very specifically an education month. So something that encourages people to learn more and really engage with the topic and find out about people rather than just kind of being generally aware of the existence of the LGBTQ plus community.
The word I think about when you're talking there is curiosity. Come with curiosity, come with that, just wanting to know more, to learn about other people and their perspectives and just about the community as well. Now, I'll probably weave in a few of my own reflections here. So I come from a STEM background. So I worked as a researcher for 18 years, not researching LGBTQ+. I was a researcher in biochemistry, but I worked in that space for 18 years, as I said, before moving into my current role as a researcher developer. And, if I'm honest, a lot of my experiences during that time were quite positive. I had a really supportive supervisors, good colleagues, and environments that I felt quite comfortable being myself. But I think kind of looking back, I think part of that was probably because my sexuality wasn't always immediately visible. And so I could, to some extent, sort of just move through those spaces without really being who I was, my identity, a defining feature of how people really kind of related to me, beyond, my immediate colleagues who I was obviously comfortable with being open with. But I think for me, what changed over time was my circumstances. And I think this will happen for a lot of people. I got married, I had a wife, and then I started a family. And that meant that my identity then was a lot more visible in those professional spaces. And that's when I really kind of had more moments of discomfort maybe lack of understanding, maybe a bit of compassion. I don't know, that kind of weaved in at that point, and I really started to notice that change. So when we think about LGBT history in science and academia, whose stories or contributions do you think have been historically overlooked or under-recognised? So I'll come to you, Morgan.
Yeah, I struggled with this question a little bit when I was sort of looking over them pre-recording. I had to do a little bit of research sort of looking into it. And often I find with LGBT History Month in the UK specifically, a lot of the same sort of names come up kind of regardless of whether it's, I suppose with this one you'd get, the big one that came up was obviously Alan Turing was the big one that came up for this. And obviously, I don't want to undermine Alan Turing's excellent work. He, without the cracking of the Enigma code, we wouldn't have won the war and all of that. But there is an element of sort of that's the one that sort of he has become a sort of figurehead for how accepting society is in terms of LGBT people in science and research. And I was sort of looking at this glaring omission of, and I think this is not necessarily a History Month thing. It might be an academia thing. It might be a research thing. I don't know. But there was a sort of glaring omission of anybody that wasn't necessarily cisgender or white. But like none of those people were really as surfaced without having to do a real sort of quite big deep dive. And once you do the deep dives, there's quite a lot of them. It's just that they're not necessarily being as surfaced as high on the web estate as we would perhaps like them to be. But I think for me, those are probably the stories that need to come to the surface. I think without those, we're only getting a part of our history, aren't we, really? So I think there's work that we can do institutionally with that. I think we probably have people that are either LGBT themselves or are engaged in LGBT plus research that we can, at the very least, through sort of our internal channels, start sort of surfacing those stories. So if anybody's listening to this and they would like to get that story out, please do get in touch.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a great call out to whoever's listening to this today. Now, something else that came out from the community was that sense that there are more stories to tell, like you've just expressed, and especially from those quieter, sort of lower key pioneers that people can, see in themselves. So, maybe at the earlier career stages, actually being able to identify with people is really important. But there was also a frustration that sometimes initiatives don't always feel that well joined up or sustained. So it's hard to, put trust in it and maintain that sort of momentum as well. So in terms of some of those missing stories, it isn't about lack of availability or ability or contribution. It's moments where identities become more visible and more complicated, or maybe even harder to contain within those existing norms. So it makes me think about who feels able to stay, who feels able to be seen, and whose contributions actually quietly disappear along the way. Now, Robin, I'd love to hear how this resonates with your experience, particularly thinking about fieldwork and whose stories tend to get told or remembered.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is kind of one of those age-old stories of minorities disappearing in the records, especially where there is a history of who is expected to be doing the science, and even kind of more currently, where there is still that legacy of discrimination, but also who feels empowered to put their stories forward and who tends to be the ones self-promoting themselves. Because there is this thing that if you see who puts themselves forward for new opportunities, it does tend to be certain demographics over others. So yeah, it's a huge thing to consider there. Within the context of fieldwork, obviously, you mentioned earlier that I've been involved with a project at the University of Leeds designed to create new resources to help support LGBTQ plus people in the field. It's available at inclusivefieldwork.leeds.ac.uk and is hopefully generally applicable to all fieldwork, not just the kind that I do where I might head out to a rainforest for however long. But it's really interesting while we were creating that to hear from different people as parts of focus groups and see what current lived experiences are from a huge range of different backgrounds. But one of the things that I'm really happy about seeing in terms of LGBTQ plus history is what Schools Out have done in their series of bios from LGBTQ plus people throughout history. So Elka Mackenzie was a botanist, a lichenologist, who did these huge field trips out towards the Arctic to look for cool lichens and have this really cool, long and respected career until she came out as transgender at the age of 60. So being able to see that and knowing about it is really important to me. And it's lovely to be able to have those kinds of role models. So things like Schools Out and LGBT History Month specifically, but also the work being done around the University of Exeter. So PRISM as a group within them have also been putting out more of these kind of scientist profiles and ways to learn about individual people.
Oh, that's fantastic. And thank you for bringing that to light. You know, it's a story I'd not heard myself, and everything that you've mentioned we'll include in the show notes as well for people, for our listeners to be able to link out to and learn a little bit more about some of these amazing people. I think just bringing back in some of the community, one word that came up a lot from the community was the word hope. So not just to celebrations, but hope for better health outcomes, better opportunities, and that willingness to be challenged. So, I wonder how the idea of hope sort of connects to the work that you're describing.
So I think hope has a lot to do with how we respond as a community. So the idea that there are these people within the university and within the wider community and society creating resources to help educate, to help bridge these gaps and to increase understanding is really good. And the fact that as we've put out these resources to help support fieldwork, people have engaged with them and wanted to be part of it. I think it's quite difficult at times to have hope, as it were, when you see a lot of what's happening at the moment in the world. But there are definitely kind of these points, and a lot of it does come from community and how we interact with each other, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is all about that community and just encouraging people to become part of those communities as well, and to be able to have their voice and feel heard as well. I think that's such an important aspect. Okay, so something else that's really kind of stood out from the community responses was how many people describe themselves as not very visible, sometimes by choice as well, and sometimes as a strategy. So with that in mind, sort of visibility in science and research can be empowering, but it can also come with quite a lot of emotional labour. So Morgan, I'll come to you as co-chair of the LGBT plus Staff Network. How do you personally sort of navigate that tension?
I think emotional labour is probably just something that comes part and parcel with having community, to be honest. I think when you are sharing problems with one another and you're doing that with empathy, then there's a relative level of emotional labour that you should be expecting to put into having a community. I think to echo Robin's sentiment from earlier, 2025 was really quite a difficult year, both externally and internally, as it responded to everything that was going on in terms of particularly impacting the trans community, I would say. But then again, I think that message of hope is the one that we really kind of have to stand with, because I think trying to form community in the best ways possible, and it's like you say, when it comes down to visibility and people feeling not visible, it's one of those things where it's hard to straddle the line as a network, because obviously, we want visibility as much as possible, so that we can sort of, increase the volume of the community and make sure that representation is there as much as possible. But I think there's an element where we still perhaps live in a society where that visibility can feel unsafe, regardless of the support structures that you might want to emphasize as much as possible. You can't obviously force people to engage with that, nor would I want to. So I think there's an element there of the emotional labor for us really is trying to make ourselves as much as possible visible, so that members of the community know that we are there, but we're not going to we're not going to force them to join or anything. It's one of those things where, because obviously being part of it, I can see on our network who is part of it. So if people don't want to out themselves in that way, not that we ever would, but there would be at least me who can see that information. So I think the message would be, from me, navigating it is a pleasure, because it's important to me that we have that visibility in the institution, and that there is that community there for people, and that even in these very challenging times, there is people there who want to listen and want to try and change this slow-moving organisation from within as best they can.
Yeah, I can really relate to what you're saying. It's interesting. When I consider my role as co-chair of the Parent and Carer Network, it isn't really about creating visibility in the same way as the LGBT plus network, but I think I was drawn to it because I felt like I had quite a lot I could give, partly from my own lived experience, but also because I just really wanted to help create that space where people feel safe to come together and be able to share what's going on for them. And like you say, that openness and empathy does come with some emotional weight, and it isn't a bad thing. It's just real. And I think it makes it even more important to be mindful about your boundaries, and notice when you need to step back and look after yourself as well.
I mean, there's weight to it, isn't there? It's it's not necessarily a burden, but there is weight to it. But then when you talk about having visibility from the position that I'm in, it's like, well, yeah, but I asked for that by taking the role on. Do you know what I mean? Like I when I said I would do it, I sort of volunteered to be visible, on behalf of, the community that I represent in that way. So as opposed to some members of the community who the past year have had visibility kind of thrown on them in a way that they did not ask for. So the least I can do is use the platform that I've got to try and, whether it's successful or not, at least be trying to change things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That question of visibility and emotional labour shows up very strongly when we think about LGBTQ plus parents and carers as well, particularly in research and professional roles, where experiences often sit outside the institutional conversations altogether. Why do you think that is, and why does creating space for that lived experience really matter?
I can talk about it from the perspective of the network. We do have some LGBT plus parents in the network. A lot of the ask really has actually been about collaborating with you, to be honest, to make sure that they have the community that they're looking for. So when we first started connecting with you, that was very much coming off the back of ask from LGBT parents within the network. I suppose in terms of why I think it happens, I don't know if I were to sort of make an assumption. I think it's about time, isn't it? I think when you're having institutional conversations, you need to be given the time to have them. And when you've already got the constraints of a family sort of sitting on top of you, I suppose there's also and your day job and anything else you might be going through in terms of your identity that might be sort of crossing over with that, then the time is going to feel like it's potentially slipping away from you a bit. I suppose you can probably articulate that better than I can, but that's what I was guessing at.
Yeah, and thank you for making that connection between the two networks as well. That's why we've now created a channel for the LGBTQ plus parents within the Parent and Carer Network, and we've actually got a session coming up to bring this community together, which is brilliant. I mean, I mentioned earlier that the big change in terms of me and my visibility as a gay woman kind of came with that parenting responsibility. Even things like, who's the real mum, or are you mummy or mama? And people don't realise, and I go along with it a lot of the time. I'm like, oh yeah, I almost make light of it sometimes, but in my head I'm like, I have to just gently remind myself that these are both my daughters. They're both mine, regardless of their biology. They're my children. And it's some of those things that I guess you're not always prepared for, or know really how to respond. And I love to talk about the journeys and talk about my experiences. I'm very open, and if people come with me with curious questions about it, I'm happy to share. But it's when those things are sometimes just put upon you with just that slight bit of judgment that it kind of lands a little bit funny, and it's difficult to know how to respond. So yeah, I'm hoping that by expanding the community in the parent and carer space to include LGBT plus parents, in this space, I can't wait. It's going to be great, and I can't wait to meet more people who are parents like me. So moving on to one of our kind of final questions actually today is, for colleagues who want to engage meaningfully with LGBT plus History Month this year, particularly around science, innovation and research culture, where would you suggest they start? So I'll come to you, Robin.
I think the Schools Out website is a really good place to start with that. And I think it is lgbtplushistorymonth.co.uk. So very nicely geared towards being the official organizer this month. And as it is an educational month, it may be geared more towards school kids, but honestly, who doesn't like a bite-sized resource to be able to learn about some people? But also just to have a think and not just kind of are people visible to you? And do you know anyone personally who is involved in science communication and is LGBTQ+? But kind of, well, what do you do to support them? I think at this point, there is that point of what can we learn? What stories can we pass on about people? And maybe we don't talk about Alan Turing next time, or we talk about him as one of many options that we give to have people see themselves. But genuinely to think about what you can do to support friends, colleagues, check out the inclusive fieldwork guidelines. But yeah, taking things a step forward from education into action, especially if you're within this kind of space of academia, there are so many opportunities that just arise day to day to perform allyship.
Yeah, oh, brilliant. Thank you, Robin. Yourself, Morgan?
Yeah, I'm the urge to just do a completely shameless plug and suggest getting involved with the LGBT staff network if you feel safe to do so. I think one thing I would like to sort of make sure is clear about the network is that, yes, we do operate events and things, but also we're very open to being approached and providing some money for things that other people want to do. It's, we're not at all gatekeeping this minute budget that we have been given. If we can support other people to do things that they want to do with the network, then we are 100% happy to try and facilitate that. I think also engaging with just the other resource that's going on across the institution. Internal comms will probably be doing a whole bunch of things over the course of the month. There'll be blogs and things like that people can read. A big shout out to the people at the libraries also who are doing a display and a curated collection is what it's called. I can provide a link to that we can share with everybody, but that's been collaborated with across the entire institution, including the LGBT staff network, who have all contributed texts, fictional, non-fictional, research texts, all kinds of things that will be available, I believe, from the Laidlaw Library for the entire month.
Fantastic. Thank you for all those shameless plugs, and everything will be included in the show notes. So please, do engage with those and get involved. So I think still that one word I think I mentioned earlier in the conversation about curiosity, and none of us can know anything about every single thing about identity, about culture or experience. There's still so much that I don't know, and that's okay. It's okay to not know everything. We're not, it'd be impossible for us all to know everybody's experiences and perspectives. But what matters really is how we approach difference, with that openness, with that curiosity and that genuine desire to understand rather than judge or feel defensive. So today isn't about having all the answers. It's about that listening, reflecting and thinking about what science and innovation spaces can look like when curiosity, respect and that all-important psychological safety are actually genuinely present. So I'd just like to thank our guests today, Morgan and Robin. You've both been absolutely fantastic. It's been really great to have a conversation with you. That just leaves me to say thank you to our listeners and to our wonderful guests.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Research Culture Uncovered podcast. Please subscribe so you never miss out on our brand new episodes. And if you're enjoying the discussions, give us some love by dropping a 5-star rating and written review, as it helps other research culturists find us. And please share with a friend and show them how to subscribe. Thanks for listening, and here's to you and your research culture.